first panel discussion, which will be moderated by Professor Sunil Sangra. He's the professor of strategy at BIMTech, which most of us know. Some of people at BGU may not know that. And he's a design thinking evangelist. He's also made trips to BGU, so I'm sure many of you have met him earlier. He has already sent us the video which forms the background for the discussion, the video from Founding Fuel. And I would now request Professor Sangra to introduce his panel members and take the session forward. Over to you, Professor Sangra.
Thank you, Professor Chuck, and good morning, everybody. Delighted to be here with each one of you. And I would also like to thank Dr. Chaturvedi and Dr. Mathur for sirs for setting up the context so beautifully for the entire program. And it's particularly heartening because the session that we are working on or we'll be delivering actually relates to many of the aspects that you brought out in your inaugural address, right? So with those words, as Professor Chuck had mentioned, we are basing the session on the video, which coincidentally was aired almost exactly a year back on 30th June 2020. And this is a video where it was a masterclass. The theme was the future of the MBA. The video featured stalwarts from the business education world, Professor Srikant Datar, Pramad Sinha, Ajit Rangnekar, and many, many more, right? And there were also two breakout sessions that preceded the masterclass. And on the links to all the three videos have been shared with all the faculty colleagues. We have also shared with you 3 Word documents which outline the content of the discussion in each of those videos. And my hope is that all of you would have had an opportunity to go through those. So that is what has inspired this session. So we're not going to be repeating what the session says, but hopefully building on that, right? And our attempt as we go forward is not to be prescriptive. Because to borrow, what Dr. Chaturvedi had said, this is a conversation. This is an opportunity for us to reflect, to introspect, and see what is happening around us and what role can we play to continue to be more relevant with the change that is happening around us. So therefore, the idea is to promote, to stimulate thinking, to stimulate reflection, to stimulate discussion, right? And therefore, the session has been divided into 2 parts. In the first part, all the panelists, there are 5 of us, will be talking about a particular theme that we have distilled from the Founding Fuel Masterclass. This would take roughly about 50 minutes. And the balance time that is available to us, which would be in the region of about 45 minutes, is a time for discussion, for questions, for reflection and sharing amongst the entire community. So feel free to write down your questions, feel free to write down your thoughts as the panelists are articulating their views, because we really want to provoke that deeper thinking and stimulate conversation around these themes that we've identified. The other big advantage of the online world is I love the chat facility, right? So as a speaker is talking, as a panelist is talking about his or her point of view, feel free to keep parallelly putting in your comments and questions and observations in the chat box. Once all the panelists have finished speaking, we will try and visit all of those and see what further discussion can be had with those, or are there any questions that we could work with, right? So that is the broad structure of this first session that we have, which is going to continue till about 12 noon, right? Now, the 5 themes that we've identified are, the first one is purpose, and I'll be talking about that. The second theme is about lifelong learning, which will be addressed by Professor Rahul Singh, who is also the chairperson of the strategy area. The third theme is about technology, and our colleague Meena Bhatia, who's the finance area, will be addressing that theme, and she's particularly equipped to address that theme because she's also part of the entire AACSB accreditation process, assurance of learning, and so on. The fourth theme is about diversity, right? And we are very fortunate to have, within the 5 of us, a lot of diversity in the panel itself. So we have Isha, who's one of the newer, more recent joinees at BIMTech, and she brings in, I think, a perspective of a young person's perspective of how do you approach the whole issue of diversity in the context of management education. And finally, we have Professor Soumanayak Ghosh. Friends fondly call him Shom, and that's how I address him. Shom, I've known Shom for 13 years, and I think he has this tremendous capacity for thinking deep and thinking critically, right? So Shom will, in a way, be putting together what the four of us talk about, and then he will be touching upon the theme of structure in the context of the MBA going forward, right? So that is the broad approach that we have worked out for this session of ours. And with this background, let me touch upon the first theme that we've uncovered, and which is this whole theme of purpose, right? And I think Srikant Dattar has articulated it very appropriately, that society has given business a license to operate. And somewhere along the way, business may have ended up abusing that license and ignoring the context of society in terms of what it does, right? And therefore, business by itself needs to start relooking at what is the purpose for which business exists. And consequently, should a business school also start reflecting upon what should be this changed purpose of business, and what role does the school play in being a change agent in driving this more society-oriented purpose towards what business does, and so on, right? So Milton Friedman wrote that seminal article about almost 5 decades back, right? Unfortunately, for the last, ever since then, the predominant thought in the business world has been the maximization of long-term shareholder wealth, right? And that is now being increasingly questioned. Even the more progressive organizations in the world, which are the citadels of capitalism, for example, a company like BlackRock, which has about $6 trillion of assets under management. A company, Larry Fink of BlackRock, is saying that it's time that business has to start relooking what is the orientation that it brings to what it does, and what role can it play in being more responsible towards society and other aspects. So while this realization is growing, what is also being observed is a gap between people are talking about it, schools are talking about it, but is it being practiced sufficiently, both at the level of the business and at the level of the business school? And if there is a gap, how can we go about bridging this gap going forward? Right. So there are a few thoughts that one has. And like I said earlier, these are thoughts for introspection and reflection. One of the trends that we are seeing in India, at least in some of the private universities and also in the IIMs, is a move towards an integrated 5-year business program. And I think this allows tremendous latitude to an institution. The reason being that over the 5 years, not only can you develop, start building the foundation for knowledge as far as business is concerned, but also enable the student, the learner, benefit from a sprinkling of various courses which are more connected with society, which are more connected with the humanities, and therefore enable a more critical and integrative perspective for the student as he or she continues with her learning. Not only that, think about it. I mean, if you have a 5-year program, and let's say you have 2 internships a year, one in the summer and one in the winter, the internship opportunities can be tremendous. You could have students who are doing 2 internships in social organizations. Another one is the immersion in the rural context. A fourth one is maybe something to do with the environmental context, and then 3 or 4 internships also to do with the business context. So, is this the path that we should perhaps look at to bring about this more purpose-oriented approach towards business within business education? How can we integrate more liberal arts into the 2-year MBA program itself? Because as you would have seen, not only is this feature in all the videos that are there, the 3 videos that were sent to you, but increasingly around the world, people are saying that business school or business education is resulting in narrower thinking in the learner. How can we allow more integrated, more critical, more holistic thinking? And therefore, how could we encourage students to benefit from the humanities? So how can this be integrated in a 2-year program is the other question that comes up. Now, in the context of a school like BIMTech, this is again a thought for us to explore perhaps. Should the 6th term be oriented more towards the aspect of purpose? Right? We will have to, if we agree to do that, we will have to approach it differently. Because as we all know, the 6th term is the end of the 2-year MBA. Most of the students are already placed. The level of involvement is not as high as it is. So how can we be more creative in terms of bringing in theater, bringing in performing arts, and enabling a more engaging and a more interesting learning experience for the students, as well as try and achieve the objective of bringing this purpose-oriented education. Right. So these are a few thoughts that we have perhaps to reflect upon to see how can we achieve this objective of enabling students go out as the change agents that they ought to be to bring about this orientation of business, a stronger orientation of business towards purpose, starting with whatever they choose to do from day one in their careers. Right. So these are a few thoughts that I had in the context of purpose. And we will all look forward to your questions, your comments, your observations as we move forward when we open it up for discussion once all the panelists have started speaking. Now, I'm noticing that there are no thoughts, observations, questions in the chat box yet. So my request is, please make use of the facility. Go ahead, put in your chats, put in your comments, right? We will all benefit from it when we get into the discussion board. So with that, thank you very much for listening to me. And I would now like to move on to the second theme that we want to cover, which is the theme about lifelong learning. And as Professor Mathur so well articulated from Alvin Toffler's quote, lifelong learning is becoming increasingly important, right? Students or learners or managers are changing roles more frequently. And very often the multiple roles that they engage in require significantly different skills and capabilities. Not only that, the half-life of a learned skill is coming down. What we are learning today, maybe half of that is going to be obsolete 5 years later. And therefore, Rahul, the question that I would like you to reflect upon is, what role can an institution like BIMTech or an MBA institution play in enabling develop this capacity and deliver the capability for lifelong learning in the audiences that we seek to serve? Rahul, over to you, please.
Thank you so much, Sunil. Good morning, all the colleagues present here, Professor Chaturvedi, Professor Mathur, colleagues from Bhubaneswar and from BIMTech Greater Noida. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Sangra, for setting the context. I know you are tough taskmaster. We have put things, in last 3 meetings so tight that we are well defined now. So I think it is your preparation which has put me on more defined way, and I hope what I have prepared and I have already discussed with you is going to be useful in the context which you have said. So the first 2 things first, and I have about 5 slides, and I think about 9 to 10 minutes time. What I'm going to do is in the first 3 slides, I'm going to talk about the first 2 questions that you have raised. And in last 2 slides, I will talk about how is it relevant for BIMTech or BGU. Right. So setting up the issues of environment and capabilities, I'm going to deal in the first 2-3 slides initially. Just to put the context in shape and where I'm coming from, meanwhile, I'll put the presentation on. So the idea that I have, please go down. I hope you can see the presentation.
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Thank you. So just to put the context, I think we are debating on how are we questioning business education? Why are we questioning business education? Are we really satisfied with that? How the learning is happening? What disruptions are coming in? I think almost 110 years back, the same was happening to the medical education. In our internal discussion, Professor Sangra, we talked about this report of Flexner report. which shaped the medical education the way we have it today. But it had the similar kind of 30, 40 years of confusion before the 1904 Flexner report came in. This kind of confusion got again on surface, and we started debating on, about the relevance and why are we pursuing management education the way it is already going on. And in 60s, Ford Foundation established a consortium of schools and professors. And I think it was 64 or 63, and we came up with a report. After that, we have not heard anything on business education, unfortunately, except the personal initiatives of few business schools or professors like Professor Shrikant Datar. We have been having debates in past. I think we heard Professor Shade, the IMT Louisiana president, the past president, and few others who are coming from practice side and the scholarship side. And I already, before coming to this discussion, I watched some of the videos of Professor Mintzberg also, who always questioned the way it is going. And the Roger Martin, when he made the statement that if business education continues to be the same and Academy of Management continues to be the same, it is going to be what General Motors has become so now, right? So that is the context. I think the context is already set by Professor Chaturvedi, Professor Mathur, and yourself, that we are missing something. So I think I would not capture everything because it is not possible, but in next 6 to 7 minutes time, I have one agenda, and I would be able to achieve that in 6 minutes time. That's a lot of time for me. And that is how executive education is seen or lifelong learning is seen, right? With this panel, I'm creating a case in the first 2 slides. And I'm coming from why is it happening? Why are we thinking it this way? How is online education going so strong nowadays? It is very close to executive education or lifelong learning. So I'm making a case of business at doorstep. All of us know it. There is no new realization. It's not a deep thought that I'm bringing in. It's already an insight which is brought in by the industry leaders and academic leaders and scholars. And the idea is, for whatever reason we used to go to the market, that is coming to doorstep. So it was banking services, it was grocery, it was probably white goods. We have always felt like Indians cannot buy anything without touch and feel. That is changing, right? So the business model is changing, doing business methods are changing, the commercial language is changing, and technology, which used to be kind of a support system yesterday, has become a necessary infrastructure like finance today. So the talent and finance used to be the core infrastructure after building, and now technology is added. Probably building is going out and technology is coming in. So there are still 3. Building is replaced. So all those institutions which used to have huge building probably will find another challenge, the depreciation challenge or how to utilize this kind of building that we have now. The business case is business is going at doorstep, and so education is following that. Education is becoming place and pace of mind. We have seen Gurukul system where historically we are coming civilizational, characteristic. We have followed that in Indian education system. And after that, many institutions followed that in a different model. Internationally also, this has been followed. And then probably the Gurukul system got changed to one building institution where the residence is not compulsory. Now that one building institution is also going and it's getting into the cloud slowly. For experience, there would be a few things, of course, but otherwise it is going in the cloud. We have to model either through simulation or through real life situation, how the communication and behavior would be transferred. But we have seen knowledge can be transferred. There is the skill side and knowledge side can be transferred. There is no problem in that, right? The soft skill side, we still have to test. And it is not happening in one phase and suddenly. Last 20 years, we have seen libraries going online, classrooms going online. Harvard edX decision was changed in 4 hours I think we discussed about it when Professor Malhotra, an accounting professor, came back to office and reversed the decision taken by Dean because Dean had rejected the idea of going online. But within 24 hours, the decision was changed, right? Committee reversed the decision to launch edX. So some of those changes have happened, and I'm building it not from the executive education point of view only, which is for experienced learners, but I'm building it up from the place and pace point of view, right? What is happening in this and how is demand coming? We have experienced it ourselves when we launched Cool, and Professor Dubey has a lot of experience about it, data points to verify what we are saying now. There are two kind of scenarios. We'll have a lot of degrees and certificates requirement and a few hundred institutions, but credibility would be missing. What Professor Mathur said, that is very, very important and critical. And the scenario two is the skills which are needed is critically important. You will remember 3-4 years back, Infosys sacked about 3,000-4,000 employees because they were not moving to the next level of skill attainment, which was demanded in the West as client requirement. And one side they were sacking, another side they were recruiting in search of the new skills. I'm coming to the core of now in next 3-4 minutes time. And that is what, how is it moving and what we need to do. So I'm setting up the context and then going on, how do we need to shape up under which, under the initiatives we are already having, how to categorize that, right? So some of these points have already come in, but there are a few points I want to highlight here, which has already been presented by Professor Sangra in a different way in other language. I'm putting that into numbers now that, the requirement of change in the syllabus probably is every 5th year in total. You will remember when Professor Noharia came in, he said, Harvard has not modified its syllabus for 18 years, and that's my first job. That's not going to be repeated. Harvard will lose its position beyond 10 if it continues to be that way, right? Others have automatically come in. In India, Great Lakes has shown the path. ISB and Great Lakes have modified their syllabus every 3 years. And the Great Learning, which is an online initiative, I think is the best example that we can have in India, which is kind of giving direct competition to Coursera kind of platform, right? Design side, the content, skill, and communication, they are going to be the must. So as professor, we have huge pressure on research, but we also will have very huge pressure on industry skills. If we don't have that, we will become outdated because students will demand it and institution will have to serve it to get those who are serving it, who are offering it from outside the business school. And that's the reason we are talking about today what Coursera is offering and how Coursera can be integrated in the existing business school systems. If business schools don't develop it, they will sell part of their degrees. I'm calling it as a sell. They will sell their part of degrees to outside institutions. If we don't build capabilities, we will sell our part of degrees, right? How do we do it? Building on the capability side, and how can we, as a business school, plan on it so that we don't fall in that trap of losing the industry connect or the skill connect or the research connect. Taking example of BIMTech, we have 3 centers. We have very specific requirement of integrating ourselves with what is going on in industry, and I have about 1 minute time and finish in that. CMDC will have more crucial role because industry now is actually looking for engaging their current employees through online learning. Now industry has learned it is really very effective. You will remember that LinkedIn has signed online learning for about 1.5 lakh employees in different organizations, and they are silently offering these kind of courses. They don't promote it the way Coursera does it. Tool Center is one of the best initiatives we have had in last 1 year time, which has huge potential to offer shortened courses and long-term courses, both in the online format and hybrid format. And the PGPX office, which has not yet picked up in the format that it had followed in past, need to bring it up again as a hybrid model and an online model with a higher valuation of the program, right? So I'm not going into detail. I just wanted to put in that we need to take a. I know Meena is going to talk about technology, but I would submit my last frame of sentence is that technology now is infrastructure. If we don't develop that, business schools or universities will fall. They will be like Kodak. They cannot go ahead. So I'll stop here. Would be happy to take questions as they come after the session. Thank you so much. Back to you, Sunil.
Thank you, Rahul. Thank you for those wonderful points of view that you generated. And we are running a little behind time, so that is why I'm not going to comment more on that, except that I'll quickly invite Meena now. And Meena, my request is let's try and please stick to our time limits. Yeah.
Okay.
So, and Meena is going to be talking about something very interesting because I think before COVID, if we talked about digital education or online education, chances are the response would not have been very encouraging. But then we've been doing it for the last year and a half or so, right? So one of the interesting questions that comes up is how can technology be used to augment learning outcomes, particularly in a program like the one we run, a business program? And since Meena, like I said earlier, is also closely involved with the accreditation process at BIMTech with the ACSB and other institutions, Meena, we'd love to hear your thoughts on how we can go about this issue, please.
Thank you so much, Sunil, for giving me an opportunity to speak. Good morning, everyone. I'll share my screen very quickly. As Sunil has just said, I have very little time with me. So we've already talked about technology. Rahul addressed that in his presentation, and Professor Mathur and Professor Chaturvedi also spoke about it. We all, setting the context, if I talk about, we all know that COVID-19 pandemic has caused a paradigm shift in the system. We have seen in last 1.5 years that many institutions have opened the gates to innovative methods of transmission. And it has accelerated the pace of adoption of technology. We have seen a surge in online webinars, virtual classrooms, teleconferencing, which has been going all around the globe. So what are the advantages of digital learning? As faculty, we all are aware. We all know that it provides an easy access to education. It has increased mobility and flexibility. They can choose their time to learn and the place of learning. And also you can use technology tools to help learning process, making it more collaborative and interactive. Also, you can decide your own personalized learning experience. There are so many tools which are available in the market, which are with the current learners that we have. They find that more impactful than the printed textbooks, right? So while on one hand, we have advantages of learning technology, on the other side, we all are aware that the National Education Policy 2020 highlighted on many things, but one of the most important things that they highlighted on was that they want to increase the gross enrollment ratio from 26.3% to 50% by 2035. How will that take place? The emphasis that has been highlighted there is that the accredited institutions will now have the option to run many open learning, distance learning programs and online programs in order to enhance that reach. So this provides us with a lot of opportunity, as few other speakers have spoken about. How do we do it? If I look at, I've spoken to a couple of colleagues from other institutions and read few articles. How do we talk about leveraging online learning by using technology? As I see it, there are, 3 options that we have in hand. One is, can we add to our offerings? Additional offerings, can we provide that? Is there's already a lot of ready-made online content which is available. Can we use that in our current offering? So when I say ready-made online content, we talk about Coursera, LinkedIn, Udemy. There's a lot that is already available. Yet another option can be creating our own online content for educators, for students, our current students or prospective students, and even for our alumni. Right, so I'm going to take you through these three options. What is it that BIMTech can do, right? Additional offerings, so Rahul has already covered this. How can we add a lot of shorter programs? There's a research which shows that people want short-term programs which are focused on, enhancing their skills in a shorter period of time, right? So that is going to be one big change as we've seen in the last 1 year. I'll share a few examples also as I go. And also with a fast changing workforce, it is essential that we bring in short programs to fill in the gap. All right. While this was already talked about by Rahul, I do have certain examples to quote. In last 1 year, the surge, as I said, 2 examples to quote. I looked at IIM Lucknow online offerings, and I could see a huge list of programs that they have created and have already started offering. Right, so we have advanced programs, we have executive programs being offered by IIM Lucknow. Yet another example is that of IMT Ghaziabad, wherein they have tie-ups. And see, there are 2 ways to do it. Either you tie up with the EdTech institution or you do it on your own. So the way we have here at BIMTech, but tying up with Upgrad, other institutions have done it with Upgrad, Zaro, there is Talentech, there is Eruditus, there are many of those wherein you can tie up and offer those programs. And I was surprised to know that with online program of IMT Ghaziabad, they already have 2,500 students with them. Now, with that kind of students, one can imagine the return on, a very low investment. So on one hand, yeah, we can challenge what kind of education is being provided, but if there is a brand that has already been created, and if you can get 2,500 students enrolled in your program, that's going to be a big game changer. And another thing that I could find out from IMT Ghaziabad was not just that they're providing 11th-month online program, they have also arrangement with a lot of foreign universities. Now, what does that arrangement do? You can transfer your credits. So that makes education affordable. When you transfer your credits to a foreign university, you can get a PGP in management sitting in India, transfer those credits to Leeds University in UK, and get a degree of UK as well. So that affordability is, with 2 years, if you spend 1 year here and 1 year on online program of Leeds, that is a pretty interesting thing to do. Now, while I talk about this, as Rahul has already covered, one additional thing that we must deliberate on while we do the discussion is, shall we be offering more online programs, and what kind shall we be offering it? So one is the additional offering. Yet another that we can do is it all right to leverage already there are 4,500 courses available on Coursera, right? Shall we be leveraging the online content in our credit offerings? Now, this is for our current students, all right? So before we get into offering, leveraging those courses in our current offerings, we need to think and discuss, deliberate whether it will, as Sunil asked me, will it enrich our students' learning experience? Will it improve our students' learning outcomes? Will it increase their employability? Will it provide students with global content and perspective? Right? Will it shift our perspective towards the online learning? If the answers to these questions is yes, we might, think of doing it. Now, to quote few examples here, we have NMIMS and TAPME, which has already done it. It's not one size fit all kind of a thing. Different institutions, different universities are handling it differently. So NMIMS incorporated entire Coursera courses into their engineering degree program as part of a supplement to 20 credits that students could earn on top of 150. So there are few credits which you can surely earn from Coursera courses. That's what Narsimonji did. TAPME use it for their summer internship in order to receive credit for internship. So what are the options that we have? how to incorporate. One is to use the blended learning use case, right? So wherein we can substitute part of our courses with the content which is already available, right? On any of these, maybe we can use Udemy or Coursera, that we can discuss and decide later on. Other is to offer additional courses wherein we think we do not have enough capacity right now. Courses like fintech or blockchain, digital marketing, or any of those courses which we think we cannot, so we can offer those as an additional courses. All right. So that is one way to look at incorporating the existing online offering. All right. So then the question that arises is, which again, we must discuss in our discussion, that whether to follow the blended learning use case or the standalone use case, or mix both and use it. All right. So again, to highlight, we need to focus on whether this will increase employability, whether this will provide a better learning experience for our students or not. All right. Third is, rather than using what is already available, will it be a good idea that we have a wonderful set of faculty here, why not create our own online content for educators, for learners, and alumni? And here also, I'll also like to bring in the National Education Policies, recommendation, wherein sees that a lot of changes, demand will come from the educators' learning. We need to educate the learners, the educators who are across India, across globe, as to how to adopt technology. I was surprised as I look at NIRF this year. In fact, they'd added this as one of the criteria of ranking as to how many courses did you develop and made it available on the SWAYAM platform by BIMTech. Though they did not take the data later on, but that was added this year. I'm sure next year this will be one of the criterion to make every institute participate in offering courses on SWAYAM. So that was about third way of creating our online content rather than doing just additional offerings and leveraging online content in our learning. So now, what are the choices because of technology that is available to the learners? One is they go for exclusive classroom. When I say exclusive classroom, it cannot be just physical classroom. This needs to be aided with the technology for sure. Other option is blended, mix of both. Third is exclusive online. So learners now, because of COVID, now that there's so many institutions and universities doing it, they do have these choices available for them. It depends upon their time and affordability, that what is it that they like to pick. Now, other ways of using technology, apart from the online, there are, I could see that there are a lot of smart books also now available with the publishers. It goes beyond the electronic books, wherein the instructor can see whether the students are going through the book, they're reading it, and also they are being graded through the books itself. So I've just given that link. I'm not going through that because of the paucity of time. I'll share the link with all of you. Maybe you'd like to have a look at it. A lot of Tata, McGraw, and Pearson books are now available as smart books, which ensures, and as an instructor, you keep getting the data, who's reading the book, who's appearing for the test, how much have they read, you get all that information. There are a lot, this year, I'm sure we all are aware, there are a lot of live polls, quizzes, interactive presentations for that, a lot of sites which are available, Poll Everywhere, Mentimeter, Kahoot. We do have gamification of using gamification in our learning process. Again, there are a lot of websites which are offering that, because an online, to make it more interactive, it is essential that, some kind of gamification if we can use. Another extremely important thing that has happened because of online, the major advantage as I see is, it is for improved learning, we can always bring in a lot of experts from the industry. It has become very easy to do that now. Experts can be from corporate, from NGO, can be a politician. So that's what technology does. You can sit here and can bring in, say, anyone from abroad or anyone within India to come and speak to your students and to us as well. And it does provide an enhanced skills by organizing and participating in virtual events. Last 1 year, I know a lot of our faculty members attended a lot of virtual events, and whatever they couldn't do earlier, it was very much possible to do it sitting at home. And it also additionally provides a co-teaching opportunity. So if someone is delivering corporate finance here, can request Aswad Damodaran to do it along with them. Right, so that is another way of using technology in curricula. Yet another way to do is we've always requested a lot of our corporate people to come in and guide our students. Why not to have a mentor-mentor relationship with corporates for professional development of our students? So far I've discussed about the curricula. I'm sure we can use technology in other activities at our institution. It can be for admission. You can use customer relationship management for that. Library is not restricted only to a physical library. Library has come to laptop. A lot is available for examination. There can be a lot of placements, some internship, live project possibilities, which one can do by using technology. I would now, I think I've used my time. I will now leave you with these 5 questions, which we can take up for discussion once the panel discussion is over. So the questions are, shall we be offering more online programs? Shall we be leveraging existing online content in for credit offerings? How to incorporate that existing online content? Will we be mapping our courses, part of the courses, the whole program? How will we like to go about it? Shall we create our own content for educators, for learners, and for alumni? And in what other ways can we leverage technology apart from curricula and for other activities that any institution does? All right. So thank you very much for your attention. Sunil, I hope I have followed the time limit that you'd set for all of us.
Thank you, Meena. All of us are taking longer than what we thought we would, right? So, and that is why I quickly let me move on to our next speaker, which is Isha. And Isha, Professor Mathur, I think, articulated this very well, which is innovate or perish. And innovation, therefore, is a growing imperative. It calls for more people to be more innovative more often. And there is a general recognition that innovation benefits a lot from diversity. So that is, although that is one reason why, diversity is to be celebrated and encouraged, what are the other perspectives do you think are important, particularly in the context of a business school like ours or the school that we have at BGU, in terms of bringing about more diversity in the school?
Okay, sure. Thank you, Professor Sunil, for giving me the opportunity to be a part of this panel with my esteemed colleagues, and a very good morning to one and all. So I'm just going to take a very quick few minutes and reflect upon some of the key concerns related to the notion of diversity in an MBA classroom. And a lot has been spoken about it in the Founding Fuel Masterclass. So I would just like to deconstruct that and put it in context in our present situation. But before that, I want to very quickly talk about why is diversity important in an MBA education. So as Professor Sunil already mentioned something about innovation. So I think there are 2 reasons. So one is for fostering innovation and growth. It can be a transformation lever. The type of collaboration and innovation that occurs when people approach a problem in different ways can be astounding. Taking the best ideas and formulating solutions that have been thought through many minds with different perspectives, it can be really powerful. And second benefit of diversity is, which I believe we are sort of not considering, is it ensures an effective peer-to-peer learning, which is very essential for individual growth and professional development. Meeting people with different background and experiences, it opens new door for our minds, it expands our intellectual threshold, and it makes us more receptive to different opinions. It basically helps break rigidity in our lives and discourages us to limit our learning to merely what we need to learn, when we should be striving for continuous learning. So diversity can be instrumental in creating a transformational learning experience. That brings me to my second point. What do we mean by diversity in an MBA class? Uh, let's look at this first by understanding what kind of diversity we already have. If I'm not wrong, isn't MBA the only curriculum that seeks people from different disciplines? So in my class, I have students who are science graduates, there are arts graduates. We have engineers with work experience, and they also come from different parts of the country, different socioeconomic background, even different cultures and identities. So then where is the problem? Why are we talking about, the having diversity? I think it's open to debate. The problem is how we are leveraging this diversity, or are we leveraging it at all? We get a heterogeneous group of people, but by the end of the curriculum, we have a batch who is almost similar in skills, in knowledge, and even in their thoughts. They enter B school with a single objective in their mind, and that is to get placed and not to learn and grow. And they do whatever we tell them is necessary to get a job. So I want to go back to the point which was raised by Professor Mathur in the beginning. Year on year, we are using the same mode of delivery of our course content when we need to consistently challenge the relevance of what we are teaching. So my first question to everyone here would be, which I think is very important to reflect upon, is how to leverage the differential strengths of the students that we get. The input is diverse, but the output is homogeneous. We are encouraging students, even before they enter an MBA program, to work on their weaknesses. And in order to achieve that, students tend to forget what makes them unique. They start overlooking their differential strengths. So can we and should we encourage students to focus on their strengths rather than on constantly telling them to work on their weaknesses? This brings me to my third point. So if we already have a diversity of students from different background and experience, so what is missing? So what is missing is diversity of thoughts and experiences, and that is partially attributed to, we can say, I don't want to sound too critical, but it can be partially attributed to our education system and to our admission processes. It was also pointed out by Piyul Mukherjee in the Founding Fuel video. And she highlighted that we have been using very rigid and objective criterions for selecting incumbents in these schools. We have threshold limits for CAT scores, which again is very objective in assessment, by the way. And then we have defined skill sets on which we grade candidates. All this leaves very little scope for subjective assessment. So my second question for everyone here to ponder upon is there a scope to change that by creating an opportunity for qualitative assessments? For example, and I'm just pulling rabbits out of my head, can we solicit answers from our potential candidates to tell the story of their lives, the values that define them, what they are rather than what they want to be? Why don't seek different personalities and not the highest scoring students? And I understand that I'm leaving a lot of unconnected dots here because it sounds too simplistic to be true. We need to consider the role of all our stakeholders, the expectations of our industry counterparts, our recruiters, our regulatory bodies, our students, most importantly. Having said that, I think I have a lot of hope in our new education policy that paves way for interdisciplinary learning, which gives students the flexibility to study what they want instead of just defining themselves for the rest of their lives as science, arts, and commerce graduates. And I think this can be a very crucial starting point and can have a significant impact in ensuring diversity in MBA education in the long run. It can ensure diversity in our learning, our teaching, our course structure, etc. And my final point, and I want to close by talking about the potential challenges that we as educators can face in ensuring diversity in class and then leveraging that diversity. And that, I believe, is first our own reliance on what works well for all approach and resistance to adapt to the different needs of a diverse student segment. And it is understandable because we ourselves are the output of the same system. Second challenge in ensuring diversity in our MBA classroom is, I believe, in breaking the practice of infantilizing our students. We feel to treat them like adults. We are possessive about them. we want them to do best in everything, while what we actually need to do is make them feel empowered and create a comfortable and inclusive learning environment where they feel secure in sharing their opinions, even if they make no sense, giving wrong answers, where they shouldn't be scared of giving wrong answers. They should feel free to be themselves. So if we can bring this atomic change in our pedagogies, that we have, I think then we have ample scope to leverage the transformational power of diversity in our classroom. And with that, I, I want to leave you all with a final question to ponder upon. That is, how can we equip our educators, instructors to deal with this diversity? Because it requires a continuous drive to innovate and adjust our teaching styles. It requires for us to first break our own stigma about what an ideal MBA graduate should look like. It can be anyone. It can be, it can be an Instagram influencer or a homemaker turned entrepreneur. So with that, I think I had something very little points to make. And with that, I will leave the floor open to debate about how diversity can help us co-create value in MBA education, and pass on the stage to our moderator, Professor Sunil, to take the discussion forward.
Thank you, Isha. Thank you for articulating your thoughts so well, and thank you for keeping it within the time that you were supposed to. Right? Well done. May I now move on to our last panelist, and although he's the last, he's definitely not the least. Right? Because Shom has the task of, in a way, trying to put all of this together and also help us reflect upon, the whole issue of structure. Could there be more interesting ways in looking at the structure of the MBA, right? So, Shom, all yours. And a request, please. If you can try and shave off a little bit of the time that's been allotted to you. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Sunil. How much would you allow me?
So let's say if you can do it in about 12-ish minutes, then we'll have about 30 minutes left for discussion.
Sure, I'll try my best.
Yeah, thank you.
Please allow me to share my screen. I hope the...
Yes, it is. We can see it.
So a very hearty welcome to all my esteemed colleagues. I start with this quote: never let a good crisis go waste. And essentially that is what I think we are all trying to do in these 3 days of the FDP. What I will do is, emphasize on the fact that this provides us, I mean, that it is a crisis, I don't, need to emphasize, but that, how can we leverage the kind of opportunities that the crisis might provide us with, so that we go back, if required, to our drawing boards and perhaps start thinking about some of these things in a very, very new ways. So let me try and capture what I have to speak on in this framework. I'm saying that, look, all that we are trying to do through our programs is to create an output, of course, by that I mean our graduating students, with certain attributes, Of course, these are knowledge, skills and abilities, there are multiple skills and abilities, but specifically I am talking about 3: critical, integrative, and innovative thinking. And I have borrowed these from Professor Datar from the Founding Fuel video. And of course, besides all that, we also need in our students who pass out certain behavioral attributes. And these are, attributes related to values, their attitudes, entrepreneurial, mindset, leadership, with concern for people, sustainability, inclusivity. And I think if we are able to achieve these attributes in our output that we are producing, we are pretty much, satisfied. Okay. Now, two things we must, remember. Uh, One is that any characteristics in the output cannot come out of vacuum, and therefore, the kind of raw materials that are taken through the program, they cannot be anybody. They must have certain attributes for them to be giving us these output attributes to the best extent possible, for them to be the most conducive, I mean, in terms of the kind of programs that we are trying to take them through. So that's one. The second, of course, is the attributes of the program itself. People have talked about transformational learning experience, and I think we need to ask ourselves, I mean, what is transformational learning experience, and do we provide transformational learning experience? How do we do that? Of course, that learning experience will be a function of or the program, and the program is the curricula, the pedagogy, the assessment, and so on. So, very briefly, let's take a look at the three sets of attributes that I talked about: knowledge, the skills and abilities, the behavioral attributes, open-mindedness, humility, curiosity, flexibility and adaptability, sensitivity to people, entrepreneurial initiatives, taking initiatives. Um, the thing is that we should be able to measure some of these while selecting our students. Like I said, we can't create things out of just about anything. You know, our programs, of course, should be designed and executed in a way so as to actualize these. We have to be very mindful of that. And our assessment should be geared to measure these at regular intervals during the program. Now, I want us to think for a while that perhaps we are doing much of these things with regard to knowledge. Uh, the question is, are we doing it enough for skills and abilities? Are we doing it enough for our students' behavioral attributes? These are some questions. I don't know the answers. We have to think. Diversity, I'm basically talking about selection right now. So diversity, I won't touch upon. Already Isha has done a very good job covering it. Uh, we, in our present process, are looking for what? I mean, we look for communication, we look for leadership, creativity, current affairs knowledge, subject knowledge, and in a 30-minute I mean, how well are we really able to measure these? Number one. Number two is that is there anything else that we need to measure or and look for? You know, important thing is that we are. I know CAT is the gold standard that everybody goes by, but just to put things on perspective, 80 percentile. This latest CAT I'm talking about, 80 percentile score corresponds to a raw marks of 50 out of 228. Now, just think about that. That's less than what 25%. In an exam, we all know what it is designed to measure. You know, and the question that I'm asking is that if you have gone through the Founding Fuel video and look at the example of Unilever, can we design an online assessment that every candidate must go through? A qualitative tool like Isha talked about, it will give us an overall profile of a candidate on multiple attributes that we can think of. Of course, this will be in addition to the interview that we hold for the final selection. I think this is important for us to think about. The program design. MBA is the only professional program which is unlike any other professional program. And the reason is that our outputs, which is the managers that we produce, they are expected to operate in the gap. What is the gap? The gap is the difference between what we already know and what we need to know to take a decision in practice. And we are never, ever, how much ever time we may have spent in the industry, uh, able to reduce this gap to zero. The gap will always be there. All problems faced on the job are out of the syllabus. I hope we all understand what that means. And how well then are our students equipped to deal with these out of the syllabus problems? And how well can we equip them? Knowing, doing, being. Are our programs dominantly focused on knowing? I heard multiple people talk about content available, technology enabling content. I think we must not miss the point here. Content is available dime a dozen. Today, content is of very little value. I mean, technology has completely blotted all boundaries. So knowing itself may not be enough. Can we design programs that have heavy components of practice and experiential learning, working in teams? For paucity of time, I'm not getting into HBS and AIMS example. Just to give you a very little flavor, AIMS is the only MBBS program in the country, which is very different from any other MBBS program. And if you follow AIMS, related discussions, you will understand why. Because they are 60-70% of their program is only practice. They don't, I mean, theory is important, of course, but they are hands-on. They're very, very hands-on. Can we have components in our course where students grapple with abstract problems with a lot of flux, insufficient information? Because these are the real world problems they are expected to deal with when they actually go out and practice in the world. How much of the exposure do they get in our program? Can we bring in the industry and NGOs to discuss some of the most challenging current issues with our students? We have the scope, like Meena pointed out, and then ask our students to work on those in cross-functional teams, best leveraging diversity. Critical, integrative, innovative thinking. Today, we don't have enough courses that focus on these skills. I may be wrong, but this is just my perception. Whereas these are very, very important for student success in their careers. So, there are multiple big issues facing the world and our country. Of course, we all know that. Hunger, poverty, malnutrition, water related, environment, healthcare, education, business related. Can we ask our students to work on some of these issues? Defining the problem, defining itself, could be very, very difficult in these complex cases. Understanding what is the scope, who are the stakeholders, what are the reasons underlying behind each of these challenges, possible solutions, what could be the implementation challenges, and so on and so forth. I am not getting into this example once again because of paucity of time. What kind of student groups do we want to work on such problems? I'm sorry, we tend to create groups which are more homogeneous. That doesn't make much sense. I think we should look for creating student groups which are as heterogeneous, as diverse as possible, so that there is a lot of mix, lot of flux in their learning. They learn from each other. We are very, very fortunate to have our own AIC, and I understand that students already work with AIC during a course or two, but can they work with each incubative business for over a full year to understand, their business environments, their models, the markets, the challenges, the financial, the operations? sensitivity to people. Are these important? Why should these be important? Should these be a part of our programs? Sunil talked about liberal art courses. Now, I have a list of here. I mean, imagine film history and appreciation, or theater. Indian and world art movements, or some famous works in the world and Indian literature. Do we think that these are irrelevant for management education? Will such courses expand the boundaries of the mind, help build greater empathy and diverse perspectives? Generalist versus specialist. Now, most speakers agreed that the word specialization is a misnomer. I mean, doing a few courses within a function doesn't make one necessarily a specialist. I just, took a look at our own structure at curricula. And so we have maximum about 120 credits. Now, in PGDM itself, we have, I think, about 8 functional and 8 vertical electives is what we are envisaging for the next academic year, which leaves about 24 courses which are core. And if you compare this 24 with the 16, so-called specialized, we are a general program, more or less, even now. So just for comparison, and think about it carefully, Harvard, 10 courses spread over 2 semesters in the first year. Students do 10 courses spread over 2 semesters in their first year. 10 electives in the next 2 semesters. And that's it. That's the end of their program. Wharton and Stanford, these numbers go up to 12. I looked at FMS because that follows a semester system. 8 courses per semester, 4.5 credits per course. 22 out of the total 32 courses are core, 10 are electives. So the point I'm trying to again perhaps raise is that there is a trade-off between quantity and depth, if you know what I mean. Can we start a discussion on which model is more effective for our students? And this is the final slide. Can we have year-long?
Shom, sorry to interrupt, but could you try and wind up, please?
Yeah. Can we have year-long fieldwork-based modules based on hands-on experiential learning, building entrepreneurial ventures, solving big problems, leadership in practice? These can be team-based with diverse members. If these modules, these are year-long modules, and if these are running along with some of the core courses, then students also get an opportunity to apply what they learn. Another thing that I am thinking about is that can we have a 5-month-long internship instead of the present arrangement where students start in April each year and continue through the 4th trimester, continue on an industry-specific project, and then what about the course as well? We have technological solutions for that. The advantage is that they are able to actually apply and see more of the contextual things. That's it. I think more or less I have made my point, so I would like to end here. Thank you very much, Sunil, and thank you very much to all of you for listening.
Thank you, Shom. I think you did a wonderful job, of putting almost everything together and raising some very important questions in the context of various dimensions of structure going forward, right? So there have been some comments which have come in the chat box and some questions, and I would also like to open this up to everybody now to share their questions. Please feel free to unmute yourself and share your question, your thought if you have one. We don't have too much time. We have roughly about 25 minutes, but I think we can at least get some discussion under the belt at the time available to us.
by suggestion, Sunil, that you fix the time for asking a question
Right,
and
sir.
answer to be given by the panelist.
Sure.
Otherwise, 2 or 3 questions will take most of the time.
Correct, sir. So, as suggested, may I request everyone to please keep their questions or comments brief. Maybe take about a minute at the most in articulating your thought.
Can I go first, Sunil?
Yeah, please.
So first of all, it was a wonderful session and very, very educative and diverse view. There are 2 questions which comes to my mind. One is, we are all gung-ho about using technology, but it is not easy, okay? Saying that we should merge this, merge that will become very, very difficult. I'm trying it for last 6 to 8 months time, and implementing such a model, running a class online, and some of our faculty colleagues like Meena here, Suvanmay Ghosh sir and others have participated. Doing totally online is very, very difficult. So let us be aware of the difficulty quotient. And the second part is that we cannot eliminate the teacher experience, which the online is not able to give. So we are primarily focusing about our offline students here. We are not talking about online. Online don't get the same privilege. They are not paying the same amount of fee. So we can give them a little less. But for our offline students, which we consider to be coveted, we need to find some different strategy.
I mean, the other panelists can come in, but I have a quick thought on this, and which is actually relevant not only for the question that you've raised, but also for various aspects that we've discussed, which is that should we have a one-size-fits-all approach? A very motivated learner can benefit tremendously from a totally online experience, because he or she is going to put in the required effort on his or her own initiative, and therefore take away what needs to be done. And there will be other learners who require that constant engagement and prodding and mentoring in a more closer environment, perhaps what we have in a physical classroom. So therefore, is it time for us to start segmenting our learners and see who can benefit from what kind of an approach?
Sir, as long as our quality of students which we get, it will become we don't get students who are highly motivated, which join Harvard or IIMs.
I agree.
The whole challenge.
So therefore, that brings us to that earlier thought that Isha raised about diversity. Do we have to go after a particular profile of students in terms of analytical abilities, getting 80 percentile plus in the CAT score, or are there jewels out there who are perhaps not even there in our consideration because of our selection criteria? And this is not just for us, but for perhaps all business schools to think about, right? And I don't know if my fellow panelists have any thoughts on this, please. Only request is let's keep it brief. Okay, while we have more questions coming up, there was a question earlier about, Emerson's blended value and the whole issue of purpose. So I think Arun Mehra, in one of the breakout sessions leading up to the Founding Fuel video, said it very appropriately. And he said, businesses operate on the principle of customers first. And business schools teach students that. Does customers first imply customers over society? And therefore, if that is going to be the orientation that we bring about, then chances are the kind of blended value that Emerson and others talk about will be more difficult to bring about. Right? So I think that's a very interesting perspective that he has shared. And there is another thing that Arun Mehra went on to say. He said, it's not just about business, but look at any profession. Being a doctor used to be a very noble profession. Being a journalist used to be a very noble profession because
Sangra, can I ask a question?
It was about bringing out the truth, right? But both of these are now getting corrupted increasingly by money. And think about business, which is driven almost entirely by money. So perhaps the level of corruption and the level of dilution of values is exponential in the context of business education, right? Yes, sir.
Professor Sangra, can I ask it? Can I?
Please.
Yeah. I think the main of students coming for MBA has been predominantly for placement or getting a job in industry. And the industry's expectations are also changing. I think we are not changing our orientation to match with the changes happening in the industry. So the CAT score or the selection criteria that we have may not be adequately checking the attributes of students at the entry level. I think we have to relook at our admission criteria and look at some of the behavioral aspects, attributes rather than only skill or knowledge attributes or the talent, that IQ level. So I think most of the things which industry see is include basically aptitude of the students, right aptitude for the job, and somebody which Sikandatar has said, the beyond the syllabus kind of orientation. Are we really doing that? I think we are orienting students within the syllabus. Whatever is there in the syllabus, we try to impart those things. I think we have to relook at beyond syllabus orientation, what we in future MBA.
Right. And Sean, do you want to take that? Because I think that's what you covered.
I fully agree, and that is what I actually emphasized upon. So we all need to actually put our heads together later as to how do we do that.
Yeah, how to do that? We have to think about that.
There was another very interesting thought that came up, which was about are we facilitators of thinking or are we providers of information? And I think Sean touched upon that as well, that, we are getting into a future where the knowing aspect or all knowledge or all information is going to be available to us on our mobile phones, maybe even implanted into our brains as we go forward. Right. So therefore, it is not about the knowing aspect that is going to be critical. And that is why speaker after speaker in the panel has talked about the need for developing thinking skills. Could be integrative thinking, could be critical thinking, could be innovative thinking. And I remember reading a long time back that Harvard's approach to its MBA is not about, developing the capacity in students of what to think, but it is about how to think. Right. So on that comment of facilitators of thinking versus providers of information, I think definitely we want to be facilitators of the thinking process. Any other questions, comments?
Just very quickly to respond, Professor Naik, what you were saying as a first statement, industry or students are coming afresh on new skills and new requirements, but we are not changing much or fast enough. So I think that is important, and slowly I see that the integrated model that we had for being a professor, that we should know what is institution building, we should know how the consulting and training is done, we should know how the research should be produced and publication should be done. I think that is slowly getting diluted because the industry pressure is so much to catch up. We have to learn new skills to meet the industry requirement because our business school demands it. If business school does not meet the requirements to be connected, to be reskilled to the requirement of the industry, business school is dying, and so professor will not be there, right? So I think we'll have to evolve ourselves, and I'm coming from personal experience. So I reduced my publication side in last 2 years, attended more to do the industry learnings. So today I have better vocabulary on the way industry thinks and the way industry works, and I connect with that, especially on the digital transformation side. So it's not bookish knowledge, it's experience. I have lost sufficient money to learn it, right? But that's how learning comes. We have to invest in that.
Right. So we have another question on should we have collaborative teaching by academicians and practitioners? I think without a doubt, that is going to result in significantly more benefit and value for the learner. And the famous course at Stanford, which was taught together by Andy Grove, the co-founder of Intel, and Robert Burgelman, who's a thorough academic. So a practitioner and an academic in class teaching together, one of the most sought after courses at Stanford, right? So definitely, I think we can benefit from bringing in those kind of interventions as we go forward. I'm just going through the chat box, and meanwhile, if anybody wants to articulate something, please feel free to unmute yourself and raise your question or thought. There's another question about why are we teaching in silos? Yes, extremely unfortunate, right? The level of integration that we need to bring about or integrative thinking that we need to bring about in our students perhaps only happens in a few courses, such as the strategic management course or a few other courses that we have, right? Is it possible for students to benefit from more integrative thinking from the word go? I think these are things we need to think about as they go forward.
Sunil, just for information, the next panel discussion is on that only.
Right. Wonderful. Yeah.
Professor Sanjeev has some question.
Then there's a question about Bloom's taxonomy for changing times. I don't know. I'm not competent to answer this. Would anyone else want to attempt that? Meena? Rahul?
Sunil, I haven't had a look at the new Bloom's taxonomy. I'm sure they are making changes in that. But one of the higher level skills talk about synthesizing information. I think while you talk about integration, the higher level skills will address that. So they do have skills at various levels. I think they have 6 levels of skills. So the higher level 15, the point here is while we deliver our program, we are largely doing level 1, 2, and 3. We find it very difficult to reach with the existing level of learners, as Dubey sir also pointed out. It's very difficult to go beyond a certain level of skills, because we are one of the ways, as I have seen it while reading many articles about it, one of the ways to do is by following maybe blended learning, wherein most of the theory can be shifted to the pre-recorded videos or sharing the content that is already available, and spending more time on application of that knowledge in class. If that is one thing that we can do in our classes, I think we can reach out to higher level of learning. And other that I recently heard was, how do you grade them? So there is one way of grading called Kaun Banega Karodpati grading, wherein with every question, the level that you raise by asking those questions, you address those skills. So while we design our assessments, we need to keep it in mind that we address those levels as Bloom's taxonomy is talking about.
So that is the adaptive format that you also have in the GMAT and many of these other tests. Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay.
Just to add what Professor Bhatia just said, that if we want to experiment to the higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy, because our student quality is not as much so that we can push them to a higher level, my suggestion would be that try out online, offer courses, short-term, long-term courses with tools for external work. That will at least prepare us with the content, and that content will be made available to our existing students. And maybe we can give some credit point around it.
Sunil, my own point is a little different. My point is that, look, I think this assumption that our students are not suited for a certain kind of learning is too simplistic and is hypothetical. I have a feeling that for students who are not very smart in picking up knowledge quickly and internalizing, for them, the hands-on approach and the experiential approach works better. So I think that assumption is too simplistic for us to make. That's what I would like to say. The other thing I would like to say is that many of us have been through our undergraduate, postgraduate programs. Many of us have done our MBAs, for example. How many of us remember what was taught in a course? The only things that I remember are the things that I did.
Absolutely, I get your point, Sean. And that is why this whole notion of dishing out the same learning at the same time, in the same way, to all the students, the standardization of learning that we have, starting right from school and going up to even university, I think is a great disservice that we are doing to our students. And how can we therefore, and coming back to that point earlier, how can we, do we even need to, or should we, or how can we start segmenting different learners and see, are there interesting solutions that we can develop for each of those different segments, right? Reaching to the level of n equal to 1, where you've got totally individualized, customized learning, we are getting there, by the way, right? But will take time. But in the meanwhile, can we develop a more interesting approach? Then I think there was another comment about what Sean had talked about, the importance of out of syllabus. Just 1 second, Rahul. The thing about out of syllabus skills, and the question was, are we even equipped to enable our students develop those that thinking for delivering on out of syllabus problems and issues? I think that's an interesting one. I don't have a clear answer to that. And are we equipped to do it or not? Right. Sorry, Rahul, please.
No. I think now we have changed the topic, so that was connected to the Bloom's taxonomy. We can move on with the topic you have.
No, but please continue.
Okay, so we can go back. Okay. Now, my only point, very quick intervention. My only point is that Bloom's taxonomy is a framework. It's not a theory to do MBA, right? And this framework is to improve the average quality. Whenever I talk to professors of eminence, I never hear Bloom's taxonomy being used in their method of delivery or in their consultation. They talk of their knowledge and experience to deliver in the classroom. When I ask them does it connect to Bloom's taxonomy, they say my TA does that. So it is primarily the administrative portfolio of the whole academic delivery process, and I believe in that. So I'm not saying Bloom's taxonomy is good, bad, moderate. Probably an institution which is trying to improve its average quality needs to do that, and ACSP will push it because it demands in the system. But an institution which is having a different level of quality, JNU does not need it, Flame University does not need it. These are also institutions of eminence, right? At the school level, it started coming down because now NEP says that the schools also need to follow it. Because average quality of India is poor, the education level is poor. So I don't trust much on Bloom's taxonomy. It's just a help as a framework to get academic outputs connected. That's it.
Just coming to the previous question you asked, Sunil, I think it's an important question. So I'm trying to, attempting to, give my thoughts. I agree that many of us are not equipped to deal with out of the syllabus kind of challenges. But the point is that I think the philosophy that we are coming from is that as teachers we need to know everything. If we change that perspective, and if we say that, look, as teachers we need to facilitate learning, we may not be knowing all the having all the answers. Just to give you an example, I missed it out during the presentation because of paucity of time. There was a institute I was in earlier, and we had a course on analytical and critical thinking, where I created groups of students, and we looked at Delhi NCR region and areas where there were perennial traffic jams, perennial. And it's a great waste, So I allocated each area to a group and sent them out for a period of 7 days, starting from morning 8 o'clock till evening 6, 7, covering and being present there physically, studying the traffic jam problem and trying to understand why the traffic jams were happening. Next 7 days, they were asked to study the best traffic management systems in the world. Some of the cities that we know are best equipped in terms of traffic management. And the third week, they were asked to assimilate the learning from both sets and then make a presentation as solutions to the traffic problems that the Delhi NCR faced. Okay. And I think I didn't have to provide any answer. I didn't know anything. Students went around doing it, and then they made excellent presentations. And I'm happy that much after that period, many of the solutions were actually implemented by the Delhi government, because they were the kind of best optimal solutions. Just an example.
Sure. Thank you for that perspective, Sean. And the famous saying on your earlier observation that we need to be more a guide by the side rather than the sage on the stage, right? So I think, yes, that's a transition we need to move towards as we go forward. We are coming towards the end of the session, but if I may, I would like to leave one thought for everybody's consideration. And this is something that Shom and I had experimented with much earlier, about almost 10 years back. But today's supplement to the Times of India, the supplement on education, has an article written by Nirmalya Kumar, right? As you know, he's a professor of marketing strategy at London Business School. And he says how block teaching can be an immersive option, right? So the question that I want to leave behind is that every standalone MBA institution or an IIM has the same structure of 3 semesters per year, followed by an internship, a 2-month internship, 3-month internship, followed by another 3 semesters, right? And almost every institution has similar courses in each of those semesters. Right. In a university system, it's 2 semesters. In standalone institutions, it's trimesters. In the university system, it's 2 semesters. And once again, a similar structure. Based upon this article, it seems that BITSOM, which is a new business school being promoted by the Aditya Birla Group, being set up in Mumbai, where Dr. Ranjan Banerjee is the director, is engaging in this block immersion learning structure as per this article. So in fact, when Dr. Ranjan Banerjee comes and talks to us in the coming days, it'll be wonderful to maybe, if we get the opportunity, to check with him that what is it that BITSOM is planning in terms of this immersive, modular, block learning experience that they are thinking about. So therefore, the whole point is it time for us to look at not only these so many other dimensions that have come up, but is it also time for us to revisit and rethink about the structure itself that we have for the MBA program, right? So if there are no more questions, we are coming towards the end of the time allotted to us. And I would just like to say that I think based upon the thoughts that were shared in the Founding Fuel videos, the thoughts that were that emerged from the presentations made by each of the panelists, and I think the thoughts that have come up from the wonderful questions that many of us have raised in the process of this panel discussion, there are multiple dimensions we need to explore in terms of what can we do with the future of the MBA going forward. Answers to each of those dimensions cannot come in a 1.5 hour, 2 hour session like this. But the hope is that this sets the base for us to figure out which are those dimensions, which of these dimensions could be of relevance to an institution like BIMTech or to the School of Management at BGU, and how do we develop a perspective, a plan in the coming years to see that what should be actualized, how do we go about actualizing it, what are the capabilities that we will need to build in the process, what are the changes that we will need to bring about in our structure, in the way we approach various aspects of MBA education. I think there's a wonderful opportunity for us to do all of that. And I think the objective of this session was only to stimulate this kind of thinking, right? I don't know if we've succeeded, but I would like to thank each of my fellow panelists. I think all of them have been extremely patient. All of them have been extremely diligent in terms of the effort and the work that they all put in. They were available for meetings whenever they were called for. And we've had, I think, cumulatively about 3 hours of meetings in preparation for this session. And I would also like to thank Dr. Chaturvedi and and Professor Chuck for structuring this entire FDP. I think it's a very, very in a way, a liberating experience, because it gives us an opportunity to reflect upon so many things which are important for us, but normally we do not engage in this kind of reflection, right? So with these closing thoughts, Professor Chuck, I'll hand it back to you, please.
Thank you, Professor Sangra, and to your panel. It was a very, very interesting discussion. And I think it's thrown up a lot of concerns, a lot of faculty have reacted to it. The responses are phenomenal. The number that I saw, and they could not obviously be addressed. And you've covered purpose-oriented education, lifelong learning, leveraging technology, diversity. You've talked about the structure of the MBA. They're huge concepts. So I perfectly agree with you. It would be an absolute pity to let it leave it here. we should all need to arrange for another longer session, maybe days of sessions later, where we discuss this threadbare and try and figure out what really works for us. So with these few thoughts, again, I thank you all very much.